I had breakfast.
Okay, and then
Oh, it's my go.
It's your.
excuse me, sir. If you can please just not adjust your mic, just keep it by your mouth level, please.
From Bulukwane, no breakfast.
We need sound tests. If you can just speak a paragraph or two, just loud, then we can just make sure all the sounds are right.
Okay, I'll change the line. I had breakfast. Is that better? Thank you.
I will use the President's line. Fellow South Africans,
It has actually become very dangerous to use that because as soon as people hear that, they say they want to switch off their TV.
And I'll do 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Well, my name is Sandile. It's very nice to be seated next to someone with big dollars from ever.
Scrambled eggs, thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Morning, President. This is the first time I've put a suit on for 3 months.
Welcome to the club.
His Excellency Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, our Deputy President David Mabuza, Premiers who are joining us virtually, Ms. Amani Abo Zaid, African Union Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy, Mr. Zandile Zungo, President of the Black Business Council, Ms. Renosi Mokate from the Economic Policy Advisory Council and Board of Trustees at the Government Employees Pension Fund, Mr. Akuwumi Adesina, President of the African Development Bank, Mr. Enoch Gondongwana, Chairperson of Development Bank of Southern Africa, Mr. Makta Diop, Vice President for Infrastructure at the World Bank, Mr. Martin Kingston, Vice President of Business Unit South Africa, Mr. Yakub Mare, Investment Envoy, Mr. Leslie Marsdorf, Vice President of the New Development Bank, Dr. Khotsenso Ramagopa, Head of the Infrastructure Investment Office in the Presidency. To all of you that are also joining us today, good morning, goeiemorgen, moleni, assalamu alaikum, shalom. It is really a great honor for me to welcome everyone to the inaugural Sustainable Infrastructure Development Symposium of South Africa. The SITSA has today brought together governments, funders, policymakers, state-owned enterprises, academia, and the private sector. And even though in a very different way to what we ever imagined a few months ago, just over a year ago, at the start of the sixth administration government was reconfigured with infrastructure being added to the Department of Public Works. The new department with the added infrastructure mandate to bring all infrastructure projects together in one place was gazetted by the President in August of 2019. I've always believed that government must lead in infrastructure-led investment and economic growth that can lead to the crowding in effect from the private sector. Infrastructure-led economic growth is the most effective and significant way as part of our economic growth strategy to grow our economy while at the same time respond to the socio-economic needs of our people. At the preparation meeting for SITSA on the 18th of February, that was arranged by yourself, Mr. President, numerous issues were raised. At that gathering, Mr. President, you stated, and I quote, "The scale and gravity of the challenge facing the country calls for a collective South African response. The state will have to galvanize all of society behind an orchestrated, comprehensive, and bold effort to turn around the economic fortunes of our country," end quote. Government under the leadership of President Ramaphosa has taken this direction to look at international best practice and to include our fellow African brothers and sisters. At this preparation meeting on the 18th of February, some of the most critical issues that was raised, one, that our country needs a credible project pipeline of infrastructure projects that are ready and bankable for investment and implementation. Two, also the need for a comprehensive, focused infrastructure plan. And thirdly, the need to address the fragmentation of infrastructure delivery in our country. Our country, like many countries across the globe, is facing a recession of enormous proportions. And the COVID-19 pandemic has placed South Africa even in a worse position, where the construction sector has been hit the hardest. The severe economic recession, together with the COVID-19 pandemic, has now placed an added urgency on us to navigate a new normal. In this new normal, there's even a greater need to partner in the investment and implementation of infrastructure that will facilitate social and economic growth in a workable and purposeful way. In South Africa, infrastructure investment together with the use of public land and buildings is a critical lever to achieve spatial and economic justice by connecting our people, integrating our communities, and bring people closer to work opportunities. The Infrastructure and Investment Office in the Presidency, headed by Dr. Kgotsienso Ramakgopa, together with the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure, embarked on an extensive consultation process and developed a new methodology of planning and project preparation. The new methodology was born out of the consultation process at the 18th of February 2020 preparations meeting for the symposium. This has become known as a Sustainable Infrastructure Development Methodology, SIDS. And what makes the SIDS methodology different is that it ensures that infrastructure development is not merely undertaken in a transactional manner, which is where we have fallen short for so many years. The SIDS methodology relates to the identification, consideration, evaluation, approval, and implementation of workable infrastructure in order to ensure bankability. Such evaluation is necessary to ensure that the projects are functional from a financial, intersectoral, and also needs perspective. The methodology complements and reinforces reinforces the requirements for infrastructure development in South Africa, as envisaged by the Infrastructure Development Act, which in itself is a lever we have at our disposal to achieve our infrastructure development goals and focus on prioritized implementation. Mr. President, I would briefly like to unpack the methodology. The SITS methodology specifically focuses on how the projects and programs address spatial inclusivity and transformation. Projects and programs are assessed in terms of how they will advance the national development goals, in particular the National Development Plan, and the national 7 key priorities of the 6th administration, also the African Union 2063 agenda, and of course all the State of the Nation commitments made by President. The SITS methodology also places emphasis on skills development, training and education, especially for the historically disadvantaged persons and communities, women, youth, and persons with disabilities. Mr. President, we are tired of hearing of lack of capacity. This is not true. And we must debunk the myth that South Africa does not have the capacity, because we do. We only need to recognize the skills that we have in our country. The Department of Public Works and Infrastructure is putting together a database of the skills and capacity that we have in our country. We have developed a database of young, unemployed professionals, retired professionals, so that we can pull together all the skills that we have. The SITS methodology ensures that projects are evaluated within their sectors and are assessed in accordance with the regional and district delivery model, taking into account the needs and the socio-economic environment or intersectoral viability. The last step in the methodology is to determine the infrastructure value chain of the project. What are the costs and benefits and financial aspects, including financial viability? So this comprehensive SIT methodology had been applied to an initial list of 177 projects, and 55 of them were found to be compliant with the new methodology. The projects were then divided into 6 sectors, namely water and sanitation, energy, transport, digital infrastructure, agriculture and agro-processing, and also the human settlements. Now, all of these sectors are able to respond to the social imperative to bring about significant job creation. There's also an opportunity to introduce now new efficient green technologies, reduce the carbon footprint, and facilitate spatial transformation and social cohesion. We have also identified a number of labor-intensive public programs that will see to the building of rural roads, building bridges, and cleaning of our towns and cities, just to name a few. When we now speak about infrastructure, it is across the entire life cycle. We are no longer talking about new construction only, but also about maintenance and upgrading of our existing infrastructure. Innovative construction methods, technologies, and management systems are being explored, especially in relation to climate change and the green economy. We are also exploring the introduction of green infrastructure bonds. An important change is also the maximization of commercial returns and ensuring that the project is both bankable and has a management structure that can ensure its implementation. At a policy level, we must do more to transform the construction industry which is one of the least transformed industries in our country. It is also a sector which is significantly plagued by corruption. And we are working to put systems in place that can prevent and detect corruption. We must realize that corruption steals from the poor, and that is something that we can ill afford. Corruption in this crucial job creation industry must come to an end. The National Infrastructure Plan that we are busy with is also focused on implementation-orientated and demand-driven. Mr. President, esteemed guests, we all know firsthand the mammoth task that lies ahead of us. And we know that at this juncture for our country and continent, there is no room to falter. The well-being of our people and of our continent lies on our shoulders with critical infrastructure projects that must be delivered now. We need to see less talk. We need to see more action. We must always remember our past, but now we have an opportunity to design our own future. And as we invest in the implementation of infrastructure, we must ensure that at the same time we also invest in human capital. Our investment, delivery, and implementation into infrastructure need to be accountable and data-driven, ensuring that our communities are engaged, that they are involved, and that they are resourced. We will embark on a social facilitation program within our communities, together with our partners, to engage the communities to also to support our plan. In closing, Mr. President, I wish to remind all of us of our aspirations for the Africa we want, as set out in the African Union Agenda 2063. We want a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development. We want an integrated continent, politically united on the ideals of Pan-Africanism and the vision of African Renaissance. We want an Africa of good governance, democracy, respect for human rights, justice, and the rule of law. We want a peaceful continent. We want an Africa with a strong cultural identity, common heritage, values, and ethics. We want an Africa whose development is people-driven, relying on the potential of African people, especially its women and youth, and caring for our children. We want an Africa as a strong, united, resilient, and influential global player and partner. And finally, we want a better Africa and world where infrastructure is the key to growing and building our countries in every sense. Let us use this platform to engage meaningfully and leave here ready to implement. Let us stop talking and let's walk the talk. I will now hand over to Dr. Kgotsienso Ramagopa from the Infrastructure and Investment Office in the Presidency to present on the SITS concept, the methodology, and objectives. I thank you very much. Baie dankie, Nkosi kakhulu, and God bless Africa. Thank you.
Very good.
His Excellency President Ramaphosa, Honorable Minister Dilil, Honorable Premiers, the President of SALGA, Councillor Nkadimeng, the leadership of organized business and the funding institutions, and our esteemed guests. I thought that it will be apposite for me as I explain the methodology and the process that has been followed, culminating in the seats itself, the symposium itself, that perhaps I frame the question first by explaining the genesis and the rationale of the symposium itself. So firstly, the symposium is not an outcomes-neutral process. It seeks to support the aggregate efforts in the country to ensure that we achieve a South Africa that we want. And our blueprint and foremost document that articulates in the most comprehensive fashion the South Africa that we want is the National Development Plan. The National Development Plan, amongst others, aims to eliminate poverty and reduce inequality by 2030. And it follows on some of our seminal documents, in particular, the Reconstruction and Development Program, which states the following, I quote, "No political democracy can survive and flourish if the mass of our people remain in poverty, without land, without tangible prospects for a better life," close quotes. So the SEEDS is part of the totality of the efforts to ensure that we achieve that end goal. What is it that the NDP has to say about some of the things that we want to achieve? So the NDP enunciates, as I've indicated, progress on a broad front, but I want to isolate three that are significant and relevant for the purposes of the SEEDS. The first one is about raising employment through faster economic growth. The second one is improving the quality of education, skills development, and innovation. And the last one is building the capacity of the state to play a developmental and transformative role. Then the NDP proposes a set of measures, actions that needs to be enacted by government to ensure that we realize that end state. And one of those is a suggestion that gross fixed capital formation should constitute 30% of our gross domestic product. So essentially it's about the amount of investments in the country. We know now, confronted with adverse economic headwinds, a diminishing fiscal headspace, and a pandemic, that essentially that gross fixed capital formation is sitting at about 16%. So this is not an aspirational target, it's a timeline that must come ahead of us achieving the aspirations of the National Development Plan. And therefore, the SEEDS seeks to ensure that we are able to increase the share of gross fixed capital formation as a contribution of GDP. We know that with the advent of the pandemic, the construction sector has been decimated, has contracted by about 14.2%, followed by manufacturing. I'm highlighting these two sectors because they are the ones that gives us a pristine opportunity to ensure that we are able to create jobs. So what is the point? As we answer the why question, the SEEDS contributes to the totality of the efforts to ensure that we achieve a South Africa that we want. Then the second one is the content issues. Excellency, what distinguishes the SEEDS from the rest of platforms that have taken place is a set of unique approaches to this conference. The first one is a general admission on the part of the public sector that for us to be able to build an aggressive public sector-led infrastructure program, we need to ensure that we solicit and galvanize the support of the private sector. An admission that over a period of time, state capacity in relation to financial and technical engineering has been decimated and in fact has been displaced. So there's a need for us to work much closer with the private sector to achieve the desired targets. As the Minister has indicated, we have been working flatly, intensely with the private sector over a period of 5 months to ensure that we graduate projects to the stage of bankability. The second distinguishing factor with regards to the SEEDS is that we then isolated 6 priority sectors that must undergate the work of the recovery effort, at least from the infrastructure fund. We identified the network industries as a key component of the resolution of this problem. So when I say network industries, I'm referring to energy, water, transportation, and ICT infrastructure. The choice of the network industries is informed by, amongst others, the fact that they've got greater multiplier effect, the fact that they introduce greater efficiencies in the economy in the form of connectivity and mobility. They also are able to affirm our commitment to the sustainable development goals. And if properly designed, if we make quality investments, we are able to open new opportunities for municipalities to realize land-based financing mechanism, broadening the revenue base and reinvesting back the money into the local economy. We further isolated agriculture because of its employment absorption capacity and the need to ensure that there's upstream investment in relation to value addition, what we commonly refer to as agro-processing. That if you do agro-processing closer to primary production, you are able to revitalize the economy of rural areas. And then the sixth sector has to do with human settlement because of our constitutional obligation of providing decent housing, but also an admission that the demands far outstrip supply because of the design of the typologies of housing and the fact that the fiscus can accommodate the amount of demand that is required. Therefore, we need to design new innovative instruments on how we are going to fund this sector, the human settlement. And then the other distinguishing factor is that we looked at those projects that have got the cost recovery element, essentially a revenue stream, because there's a lot of good projects in the country that are competing for resources in the fiscus and living, or if you like, crowding out social projects. So it is important that whatever is left of the fiscal headspace is directed at social projects, and those commercial projects are packaged in a manner that we are able to invite private sector participation. And we chose to go the sustainable route because there's a big pool of liquidity that is directed at funding sustainable projects, and this is cheap money. So we don't have to always look at the fiscus to support the development of these projects. Like I said, it's infrastructure because of those prioritized sectors. We say we are developing because there's an admission that the seeds essentially represent the beginning of an effort to ensure that we design projects in a manner that they are going to look for multiple pathways of funding, commercial funding, blended financing, and also through the fiscus. And it's also a symposium because it's a meeting place of the project sponsors, financiers, academia, and practitioners. So it's not just everyone who's attending this symposium, but it's a few selected people who are going to add value and ensure that we are able to design an approach that is going to resolve the problems of our country. And in conclusion, what do we know about the seeds as we sit here? The first thing, Excellency, is that is a novel approach. Novel because of the impositions of COVID. So I'm advised that is the first conference of its size across the globe to happen virtually. So I think it's a first for the country. And so it takes a hybrid model. In this instance, the presidential roundtable, yes, there's a physical engagement, but we have over 681 delegates that are attending the symposium. 263 of them are from funding institutions from across the globe. So it's not just domestic money, but across the globe. We have government representatives, 126 from the SOEs and all the three spheres of government. And most significantly, we also have professionals that are attending this symposium to help, to guide, provide a critique on how we can improve the process going forward. Mr. President, we are showcasing 276 projects. 88 of them have gone post-feasibility. If you look at the project life cycle, conceptualization, pre-feasibility, post-feasibility, financial close, execution, and the maintenance. So 88 of these projects are ready for financial investment. But to ensure that the seeds becomes a success, Excellency, is that we had a market sounding session, what we call pitching sessions, on the 28th and 29th of May, where we unveiled 93 projects to an audience of 60 financing institutions represented by over 210 delegates. I can say to you with a degree of confidence that we have received firm commitments on a number of those. At the right time, Honorable President, you will disclose the figures, but I can say to you that it runs into tens of billions of rands. Firm commitments, money that is coming into the country. So we are not relying on the fiscus to ensure that we are able to get this project going. What are the objectives of the seeds as I conclude? Is to forge a more structural and enduring relationship with the private sector. We have learned excellent lessons through this process that we have been able to achieve in the shortest possible space of time. The kind of spectacular results, President, that I've shared with you, principally because we worked with the private sector. An admission from the private sector that it thrives on the existence of a credible and robust project pipeline, and an admission from the public sector that if you choose the right sectors, we are able to restart the economy, stimulate aggregate demand, resuscitate the supply side, industrialize on the back of that, and then create employment opportunities. And going into the future, we are working on the National Infrastructure Plan. It will articulate the kind of the priority sectors that are going to help us to propel the economy. It's going to talk to the skills that are required. It's going to talk to the kind of legislative and regulatory reforms that are necessary, and it's going to talk to the needs for social compacting. Some of the propositions that are on the table include, amongst others, the Green Infrastructure Bond, around the restructuring, how we look at the medium-term expenditure framework without undermining the fiscal framework, allowing for front-loading. It allows for us to ensure that we have a closer collaboration with some of the pockets of excellence in the country, some of the MDBs that are here, to ensure that we are able to improve capacity to execute. And in conclusion, we think that the design of the state, a state that is responsive, agile, is going to help us to achieve this. So this is the seeds, Mr. President. We are confident that essentially it marks a new way of how we want to deal with infrastructure, and we think that the sky is the limit. Thank you very much, Minister Dilil.
Thank you, Dr. Kgotsenso Ramakgopa. It was indeed a pleasure and honor working with you. And thank you for all the time that you have also put into bringing us where we are today. Ladies and gentlemen, all of you who are with us here and joining us virtually, it gives me great honor and pleasure to now hand over to His Excellency, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure, Ms. Patricia de Lille, ministers who are in attendance and virtually, and our premiers, the President of SALGA, Ms. Thembing Kadimeng, and President of the Africa Development Bank, Mr. Adesina, representatives of the AU Infrastructure Unit, Mr. Enoch Godongwane, the Chair of the Development Bank of South Africa. It's wonderful to have you here. And Mr. Leslie Masdorp, Vice President of the New Development Bank, the BRICS Bank, all the way from Shanghai in China. Leaders of business, Mr. Zandile Zungu and Mr. Martin Kingston, Mr. Jaco Marie, one of our investment envoys, and the head of the Investment and Infrastructure Office in the Presidency, Dr. Kgosientsho Ramakgopa, and participants and delegates and ladies and gentlemen. When we began our preparations for this symposium several months ago, the last thing that we had on our minds was a global pandemic that would infect millions of people across the world and cause massive loss of life. We did not, as we arranged this symposium, expect such an extensive and all-encompassing disruption of global financial markets, production, and trade and commerce. We certainly did not expect that our economy would shut down and close down completely for such an extended period. We didn't expect that companies would close and that thousands of jobs would be threatened. And we did not expect that public finances would be so severely damaged. The coronavirus pandemic has triggered what is likely to be the deepest global recession in the post-World War II era, possibly as deep as the Great Depression in the 30s. Global economic prospects are highly uncertain, with unknowns about both the cause of the disease and the economic impact. We are now in an era and a period of great uncertainties. Our country has not been spared from this economic devastation. Disruptions that are caused by COVID-19 globally and locally have exacerbated South Africa's economic vulnerabilities, but they've also dimmed our economy's growth prospects. Growth is likely to fall by at least 7%, if not more, compared to an expectation of modest growth of around 1% that we expected before the pandemic struck. A long period of recovery can be expected, even when interventions that we take to stem the transmission of the virus, and even as we relax those. Now that South Africa's sovereign credit rating has been downgraded to sub-investment by all three major credit rating agencies, it will be more expensive for the country to raise money on the international markets. However, a deep domestic financial sector has helped to cushion some of these international capital flows, and the efforts to safeguard the stability of the domestic financial sector has been at the forefront of the response to the current crisis. A combination of policy measures that we have embarked on has ensured that the government continues to be able to fund itself through the domestic bond market at reasonable costs, stabilizing yields, the injection of liquidity, reducing market volatility, and alleviating disruptions to the flow of credit to the real sector. The result is that South Africa's financial system has remained relatively resilient despite the ongoing crisis. Yet the severe damage caused by this pandemic and the damage it continues to cause has not diminished our determination to drive what I would call an ambitious and sustainable infrastructure development program, which is precisely what we are all about here today. To the contrary, the coronavirus pandemic has made infrastructure investment even more compelling, even more important, and in the case of our country, even more urgent. That is why we have placed infrastructure at the center, at the heart of the stimulus our country needs to achieve sustainable recovery. Even before the pandemic, South Africa's investment in infrastructure had been declining for several years, which, among other things, had caused great hardship for the construction and related industries. But now, coronavirus has had a particularly severe impact on infrastructure service providers, both for projects under development and under implementation. As a result of the lockdown, these service providers have seen a drop in demand and revenue. Buyers of infrastructure services have delayed procurement of new projects, and they've even cancelled projects. Lenders and investors, in turn, are revisiting their decisions to invest in infrastructure projects that were deemed bankable prior to the pandemic. The cost of some inputs has increased, while some inputs are at least temporarily not available due to disruptions in national, regional, and global supply chains. Lower revenues, higher costs, and non-payment has resulted in layoffs of workers, financial losses, and also cash shortages. This requires that we not only push ahead to revive infrastructure investment, but that we rapidly move to increase the scale of our activities, our interventions, and indeed our ambitions. This crisis provides even greater impetus for the implementation of the key reforms that are necessary to transform the economy to support inclusive growth. The Minister of Finance has put forward a package of reforms that are needed to address macroeconomic imbalances and boost long-run growth as the crisis eases to lower borrowing costs and provide additional space for infrastructure investment to occur. The recovery package is intended to contribute to the speed at which South Africa can emerge from this crisis and improve the capacity of the economy to deliver sustainable, inclusive growth. Globally, both advanced and developing economies are looking to infrastructure as one of the key sectors that they want to utilize to stimulate economic recovery efforts from the impact of COVID-19. We are in that field as well. Infrastructure investment provides both short and long-term economic benefits. In the short term, it creates jobs which are much needed in our country, but it also provides economic activity as roads, bridges, hospitals, schools, power plants, and much else are built. It gets construction and related services companies back to work, inducing them to hire staff and to expand capacity. As construction services are procured, government can assess project proposals on the employment impact to ensure the job creation impact is maximized. Shovel-ready projects that have been fully developed for implementation will be the priority, ensuring that ground is broken as soon as possible, and that we go beyond what Minister DeLille said, go beyond talking about projects and go towards breaking ground and getting the projects underway. Infrastructure investment is also an important signal to the economy that investment and expansion is happening, which will improve consumer and business confidence, leading to increased economic activity. It is for this reason I keep saying that infrastructure, in the end, is the flywheel through which we want to generate economic activity. In the long run, infrastructure investment increases the capacity of the economy, reducing the cost of transport and the capacity, and reliability of key services like electricity and municipal services. This enables more efficient supply chains. It will lead to increased productivity and will drive sustainable economic growth and a faster pace of job creation. Government should also invest in infrastructure itself to enable businesses to accelerate employment and grow the economy, which will also allow government finances to stabilize and recover. Infrastructure investment should present good value for money to the taxpayer and be delivered on time and provide quality services to the public. Now, government is looking at policies that facilitate economic recovery, such as introducing stimulus packages that boost government's infrastructure spending, creating financing instruments that provide liquidity, bridge financing or debt restructuring instruments, as well as guarantee products and funds. Development finance institutions are expected to support the creation of these instruments. We will further encourage proposals from private developers for sustainable and resilient infrastructure projects, offering a clear and expedited path for their approval. We will also seek to prioritize proposals for infrastructure sectors that are important to economic recovery and resilience, including sectors such as energy, transportation, healthcare, and indeed the ICT sector. the SIDS promise a process through which the prioritized key network industries for investment will be able to be upscaled. These sectors have proven to have superior multiplier effects. They have these multiplier effects because they introduce greater efficiencies in the economy, they promote spatial justice, and have capacity to absorb skills. We decided to also include agriculture due to its employment absorption capacity, but also due to the important role that it plays in the economy. The upstream agriculture processing opportunities offer possibilities for revitalization of rural economies. Integrated human settlements is another area of focus in the SIDS process. Many people in our country are in great need of housing. The demand is huge and the supply is quite on the downside. And it is for that reason that this has also been identified as a key area. Our promise of providing decent housing to low-income communities is not complete. We are fashioning a number of innovative building technologies and financing instruments to allow the private sector to participate in the low-income housing market. In the course of implementing the projects, we will pursue ambitious transformation targets that will help to remake ownership and production patterns by allowing for meaningful participation of designated groups in the entire value chain of the project life cycle. We will use this program to support Black infrastructure service providers in much the same way as we have supported the emergence of Black industrialists. This is an industry which needs to be transformed, as Minister Delil said. It needs to be transformed with regard to the ownership of the various players in the industry. It needs to be transformed in relation to participation, the capabilities and the skills lay out in the industry. South Africa has enormous capacity for infrastructure development. Our task is to blend the skills and the experience of seasoned and even retired professionals with new generation who have the qualifications but would benefit greatly from mentoring and support. We are also determined to root out the corruption and the collusion that has plagued and dogged this sector over many years. This is a period of transformation. This must be seen as an opportunity to build and maintain infrastructure in a different way from the past, in a much more transparent and efficient manner, and with greater accountability. The process leading to this symposium has been quite revealing in many ways. The public and private sectors have collaborated in producing a credible and robust project pipeline. Clear policies and institutional frameworks and bankable investment opportunities are critical to incentivize private sector investors. Domestic business investors' sentiment is a key first mover that will help to crowd in other investors, particularly our foreign investors and portfolio investors. Therefore, we are listening to our domestic private sector needs and requests to deal with backlogs to greater investment. In addition to financing, the private sector has an important role to play as builders and operators of public infrastructure. Now, these functions can add considerable value to the public if the right procurement and contracting processes are followed to ensure low prices and appropriate allocation of risks. As we work at strengthening this newfound relationship with the private sector, and I may add, a very beneficial relationship with the private sector, government will work towards addressing investment policy uncertainties, as we are doing. We will accelerate state-owned enterprise reforms and formulating necessary infrastructure policy reforms. Particular attention will also be given to enhancing the state's capacity and skills improvement. We have said in the past that the state's capacity is challenged, but this COVID-19 moment is giving us a much greater opportunity to enhance state capacity. We are reconfiguring the public sector infrastructure ecosystem to allow for a seamless consideration and packaging of projects. The creation of a consistent and predictable project assessment methodology across all government and the establishment of a single window of entry for project preparation and packaging is key to our success. Working with the private sector, we will invest in the creation of both the technical and financial engineering capacity in the state. The SITS process has convinced us that this is possible. And through the process that we've been involved in, which has been led by Dr. Ramaphosa, we have seen on the horizon that greater capability and efficiency can be achieved through implementing this methodology. The submission and evaluation of 276 projects over a period of 5 months with significant project preparation success confirms that with more time and additional effort and greater focus on projects can be taken to financial close. We are institutionalizing the SIDS methodology as a new way of packaging as well as of preparing projects for funding. This methodology will determine 3 pathways for project funding: the commercial funding, the blended financing, as well as the fiscal allocation, which is where the state comes in. Let me thank the multilateral development banks, the development finance institutions, the commercial banks of our country, organized business and infrastructure-oriented organized bodies for contributing resources to the success of the SIDS. This is where the cooperation between the private sector, development finance institutions, and government has worked to greater perfection. And we look forward to an enduring relationship that will propel our economic recovery effort. This symposium is laying a path for South Africa after coronavirus, but also well into the future. In many ways, it represents a new beginning for infrastructure development, a new beginning that promises inclusive growth, development, transformation, and above all, hope for a better tomorrow for all our people. Now, this intervention may seem unique for South Africa only, but it is an intervention that is also relevant for our continent. South Africa, within the African Union family, has been given the responsibility of championing infrastructure development. And it is through a process such as this also that we will be able to ensure that infrastructure development across our continent is also propelled. It is through these types of efforts that we will be able to attain the objectives and the aspirations that we have set out for the African Union in Agenda 2063. I wish to thank you for your participation. This, as Dr. Ramokgopa said, is truly a historic moment for South Africa, for our continent, and indeed in the world. This is the first time this type of conference or symposium has been held, particularly during the period of and the era of COVID-19. So I thank you for your participation and look forward to the inputs that are going to be made as we hear views, thoughts, but more importantly, as we hear even more commitments of funding to the projects that we already have. Remember, we have 276 projects. Some have already been committed to funding. I need more money for the other projects. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable President, and thank you to all the participants for your attention. We will now have a short comfort break for about 30 minutes before we reconvene for the round table. Thank you very much.
I hope there's a hot cup of coffee. It's cold.